Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University. I'm the Forum's Executive Director, Jen Bernardi, and before we begin, I have a couple of announcements. Focused is being video recorded and will be available in a few weeks on YouTube. Please subscribe to Ford Hall Forum's YouTube channel to be alerted when it posts. Subscribing starts with a simple click on our website homepage where it says YouTube. If you are sharing a comment or a question in the second half of our program, please speak directly into the microphone right here so that both the audience and the video camera can pick up your voice. Please understand that by speaking, you are giving Ford Hall Forum permission to record you. And now, if you'll take a moment to silence your phones, then we can go ahead. Ford Hall Forum thanks its generous sponsors, including, among others, the Lowell Institute. The Forum also thanks its members, whose generosity makes free public forum events possible. If you are not yet a member of Ford Hall Forum, please become one today by visiting our website and clicking on the word support. Ford Hall Forum is very pleased to co-present tonight's program with the Nichols House Museum that preserves the townhouse and legacy of Rose Standish Nichols. We at the Forum hope this program encourages you to pay a visit to this excellent museum right in Beacon Hill. Here to introduce the panel is the Nichols House Museum's Executive Director, Victoria McKay.
Thank you for that introduction, Jen, and thank you to our partner, Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University, for hosting us this evening. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And on behalf of the Nichols House Museum, I'm proud to present tonight's program as a part of our exhibition and program series, Women in Politics, Then and Now. To learn more about this series, please visit the museum website, nicholshousemuseum.org, or chat with me after the program. We're also very grateful to Mass Humanities, whose generous grant has sponsored a portion of tonight's program. The Nichols House Museum tells the story of three remarkable Progressive Era women. The Progressive Era was a politically charged time for women in America. And we could say that we are currently in another politically charged moment for American women. The Progressive Era saw the birth of the new woman, with women entering the workforce and creating larger platforms for their voices through social and political reform. Technological advances in communication allowed those voices to be heard more broadly and also informed the field of investigative journalism. Combined, these two factors helped to pave the way for female investigative journalists of the time, focusing on social and political reform. These muckrakers, as they came to be known, included such seminal figures as Nellie Bly, Ida Wells, and Ida Tarbell. It is also an especially interesting period in the field of media and reporting today, and so tonight's program is proving particularly timely. It is now my great honor to introduce tonight's esteemed panel. Jen Abelson joined the Boston Globe in 2001 and is an investigative reporter on the Spotlight team. She has covered the retail and restaurant sectors and was a 2012 finalist for the Livingstone Award for Journalists Under 35. She's a graduate of Cornell University and has recently been reporting on the Phillips Exeter probe into the administration's mishandling of sexual assaults. Beth Daly joined the Eye at the New England Center for Investigative Reporting in 2013. She is a senior investigative reporter and senior trainer at the center. Before that, she spent nearly 20 years at the Globe reporting on science, the environment, 9/11, and the war in Afghanistan, as well as many other topics. Beth has received awards from the Society of Business Editors and Writers, the National Press Club, the Society for Features Journalism, and the National Headliner Competition. She has also been a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a Knight Fellow. She is a graduate of Northeastern University. Joan Vanocchi is the associate editor and op-ed columnist at the Globe. She has covered local and national politics for the Globe and previously wrote a business column. In 1980, she shared the Pulitzer Prize for local investigative specialized reporting with other members of the Globe Spotlight team. She's a graduate of Boston University and of Suffolk Law School. Our moderator tonight is Eileen McNamara. Eileen is currently a journalism professor at Brandeis. Prior to that, she spent nearly 30 years at the Globe, where she covered everything from the night police beat to the United States Congress. First hired as a newsroom secretary, she worked her way up through the general assignment staff, the State House Bureau, the Special Projects team, and the Sunday Magazine staff to the position of columnist in 1995. In 1997, she won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. A second Pulitzer Prize was shared by her and members of the Spotlight team in 2003 for their coverage of the clergy sexual abuse scandal. She has been the recipient of Writing and Public Service Awards from the American Society of Newspaper Editors, Sigma Delta Chi, the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation, and many others. In 2007, she won the Yankee Quill Award, the highest individual honor given by the Academy of New England Journalists. She's a graduate of Barnard College and Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. And now, without further ado, I hand it over to Eileen to kick off tonight's panel. Thank you. Thanks so much. Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see you all. And it's especially great to be reunited with my old Globe colleagues. A couple of us not there anymore. But I haven't seen them in a while, so this is great. I thought I would start off gently, quietly, slowly, and ask, why is investigative journalism dominated by white men?
I'm going to let Renee start with this one.
Joan, why is it dominated by white men? Well, I think it's gotten somewhat better. Since we have women who are doing stories and part of Spotlight team and breaking important stories. But I guess the question is, journalism is still dominated by white men. So I guess it's no surprise that kind of the hardest, or the part with the most prestige and status, and that gets the biggest awards, that the guys stay there.
Maybe you could tell us something about how you started at the Spotlight team at the Globe.
Well, my first job at the Boston Globe was a position called researcher, which on one hand was kind of a luxury at the time, where they had money and resources to spend on people that they could hire for these entry-level positions. Basically, the Spotlight team was a bunch of white guys, and I was a recent graduate from college. I'd spent a year or so in some small newspapers in Connecticut. I came to the Globe with my clips, which we then carried around in a portfolio. They shook my hand and quickly ushered me down to Jerry O'Neill, who was the editor of the Spotlight team. They'd lost a researcher, and they found one in me. And it was, on one hand, a great opportunity, because I now had my foot in the door at the Boston Globe in this great job. But basically, I was there to answer phones, file, get lunches, which I was terrible at, and try to find a way into the stories and into the writing, which I eventually did.
Well, I don't think I'll be surprising anybody to say that Beth and Jen are a little younger than Joan and I. And your entree into this kind of work was very different.
Yeah, so I'm Jen's a lot younger than all of us, I think. But so when I started at the Globe, I was a co-op at the Globe, and you delivered coffee. And it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of what you do in life is sort of established by the what you see around you. And what I saw around me was dominated by mostly white males, frankly, in positions of power. Investigative reporting was sort of like the exalted kind of, pedestal over here, and it was something I never even considered at the time. It just didn't happen. Times changed, there were other role models I saw, and slowly began to sort of see myself as someone who could do those kind of things. And I wish I had a different bringing up of it, education, because I would have done a lot earlier, because it's so gratifying and so important. But one thing I want to say is that I do think investigative journalism is still dominated primarily by males and white males. But I really think I see a dramatic shift. We, as part of the New England Center for Investigative Reporting, do a lot of training around the country and in high school students. We run workshops for high school journalism students every summer. And let me tell you, there's like 3 guys to every 20 women in that program, and maybe it's a self-selected bunch, and for whatever reasons they want to come to Boston. But you're seeing these women are so passionate, and young females getting into this business because they really care about exposing the truth and holding the powerful accountable. And to me, that's the best ticket for the future.
Right, absolutely. Jen?
So I started doing investigative journalism as I went up through the Globe, through different departments, and even when I was doing investigative journalism in the business department and eventually at Spotlight, I think my experience was similar to what Joan's had, in that everyone around me were still, at the very beginning, were white men. When I would was reporting on the Upper Crust Pizzeria, and there were editors' meetings and everything. I would sit in the room, and I'd be one of the only females in there with like a room full of people in khakis and button-down shirts. And similarly, when I first started at the Spotlight team in 2013, I worked on a project called Shadow Campus, which was investigating college campus, dangerous off-campus housing. And for, I'd say, about the 7 months that we were investigating and reporting, it was a team of, it was the editor and it was another reporter, and we brought in a real estate reporter. So it was the four of us, and I was the only woman. And in addition to that, the photographers and the videographers who all worked on the project were men. And at one point, and the graphics people were men. And so at one point I was in a meeting, it was like 11 people, and I was the only female there. And I turned after it to my colleague and I said, hey, that's kind of weird. Did you notice that? And he had no idea. So, no idea. So, I would like to say, though, that they were all great. I mean, they were great reporters and they were great editors, and they were all had significant talent and deserved to be there. But I think that there were also many other women in the newsroom who could have equally have sat in those chairs and contributed to those projects. And since the Spotlight team expanded over the last couple of years, I'm happy to say that there's actually an equal number of female and male reporters on the team now, and we have some incredible talent like Jenna Russell and Andrea Estes, and so it's very gratifying to see sort of other fantastic reporters sitting side by side and representing.
Right, I'd just like to speak again to the generational part, because Eileen, when you and I started at the Globe, we're talking about the 70s.
Right.
I hate to put that number out there, but
Yeah,
I
they
have to
can do the
remind
math,
myself.
Joan.
I have to remind myself every day. So it was a time when women were really just entering the workforce, and newsrooms really were dominated by white men, and you took those positions or those opportunities that were given to you, like researcher. And I also worked with some great men, and I know you hate that phrase, but everything.
What phrase?
But
That will be news to my
everything that
husband.
I've learned about journalism, really, I learned on the Spotlight team.
Right.
And in the end, even though it took a while to get that staff job that I wanted, it was the editors on the Spotlight team, Steve Kirkjian and Jerry O'Neill, who went to bat for me.
Right, right. Do you think, after your experience, is there something that women bring to this kind of work that's different, substantively different than a man might bring? Is your sensibility different? Is the choice of stories that get investigated different?
I think the topics may be different. I think the topics have evolved over time. I think maybe investigative journalism 30 or 40 years ago was more focused on, I don't know, maybe just crime. I don't know. Have the topics changed? It seems like there's more
Well,
about
Jen-
environment, there's more about student housing, there's more about.
And Jen, you just worked on a big series about sexual abuse in private schools. That's not the kind of thing the Spotlight team has traditionally been known for. Of course, we did have the sexual abuse scandal in the church, but where did that originate, that story?
That came out of reporting by a fantastic colleague, Bella English, who unfortunately just retired. But she was in living arts, and she broke that whole thing open in December with the St. George's scandal, where there was several former students who came out and spoke about the abuse, and it set off this whole inquiry and unveiled horrific abuses that went on at that school. And that was we sort of moved forward with that project and worked on it. And I would say, with that particular type of reporting, I think in some cases it was helpful to, when you talk to people with some of the worst thing that happened to them in their lives of being sexually exploited and abused. I do think sometimes that there's a benefit to, if there's a female victim, sometimes they feel more comfortable speaking to a female reporter about these things. Not always. I think my colleagues handled it incredibly well when they talk to women too. But it's it's actually been an interesting learning experience as part of that series. I would say that there is a we've debated a lot over how you describe certain interactions or things being called sexual relationships, and some of it's just an evolution in how we look at those concepts. But I think there's a pushback on when you have a woman, if she was 16, 17, 18, even over the age of consent, having a sexual relationship with a teacher. We sort of debate on how you describe that and what you talk about, and there'll be some people who might say, well, she was of consent, she was of age, she was an adult. But I think that, there's a differing view now, and even I think sometimes just among women, about what that abuse of power might be and what the exploitation there exists regardless of age. And so I think that was helpful for us. And I would say, I guess, there was a funny moment that was in the student housing project where we had these two guys who were working on the interactive graphics, and they were trying to come up with a game to go along with our series on student housing. And essentially, it was a very interesting idea, and it was a great effort for them to experiment. But what they came back with was, like, they came up with a video game where it would put the reader, it never went anywhere, but it was going to put the reader like they were a slumlord, and sort of got to make decisions based on sort of how much they wanted to rent their apartments for, or how many kids they wanted to cram in. And there was just, it was amusing, but at some point there were problems and pitfalls that could happen, and one of them was a fire. One of them was like a rape, and I was like, we can't do that. You can't, like, that's not okay. So, but they were so into it, and they were just like gaming and coming up with these development ideas. And I sometimes was like, maybe if there was a female sitting beside them, they would have flagged that as.
So that's the argument for why you need diverse newsrooms.
I think a lot about this because I write a lot about genetic testing the last 2 years. It's sort of what I've been doing among some environmental work, and I have like actually a real life experience, because I had proposed a story to do on genetic testing, that for women who are pregnant, they can take a genetic test now and be told very early on in their pregnancy whether or not your child could have Down syndrome or a host of far worse genetic abnormalities that many people would probably abort for, frankly, and in order not to continue with the pregnancy. And I proposed a story. I had, at NECIR, we're still an evolving organization, we've had several editors. And the first two people I proposed it to were males, and they did not like the idea at all. In fact, they didn't think it was a story. And for some of the valid reasons, we went back and forth. Mm-hmm. But then I had this wonderful editor named Clara Germani, who came and was with us for about a year. And I said, I have some evidence that women are, aborting healthy fetuses by mistake. And she said, okay, do the story, So I do think in certain cases, and that's a real life one, there's a certain openness to looking at other issues when you have different gender. The same thing if you had people, someone of color sitting there and coming up with ideas, because a lot of our ideas come from where we sit as people, not just journalists.
That's true. One of the things that I, reading up for tonight's event, I went back to look at like Columbia Journalism Review, which, that we've been wringing our hands for some time about the shortage of women at the higher levels of reporting and editing. And one of the things I was actually sort of thunderstruck by, because it appeared in a couple of different articles, and I'd be curious, because you've all done it, how you react to this notion that women might be more reluctant to do investigative journalism because you piss people off. And it can be very difficult to confront people and to have to deal with the backlash. Any shrinking violence up there? You find that a big problem?
I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I think that there are some men, it's kind of gender neutral. You do have to be willing to get people angry. You do have to be willing to take on the powerful. You do have to be willing to realize that once you've written what you've written and put it out, that those people are no longer your friends, but you shouldn't think of them as friends to begin with. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think there are men that can do that and men that can't, and there are women that can do that and women who can't.
Seems like an odd explanation for why women might not decide to become investigative journalists.
Right.
Or might not stay. As you say, lots of young women are attracted to it, but people seem to wash out along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to separate the gender from the personality, I think, sometimes, because, look, I am a non-confrontational person, and most people will say that about me, but I do ask hard questions. Maybe don't ask them the same way someone with a sledgehammer might ask the question, but I get the answer. And I have been put off by the very things that we're talking about, but again, I can't, it's probably formed of who I am, which is partly gender, right? But also, right. I only piss people off when they've really exhausted all I only get angry and allow them to get angry when we've exhausted all other avenues to explain something that seems implausible, so.
Right. Does it make sense to you, or does it?
See what?
I was
Oh,
asking to.
now it makes no sense. I like.
Well, that's good. We'll have to write a letter to Columbia
I mean, if
Journalism Review.
anything, I think women may be more apt to be willing to question and take on the powerful, because traditionally we haven't been part of the establishment. When you're part of the establishment, when you're one of the guys, when you're out slapping with politicians or powerful business people, it's a lot harder to stand up to them and do the reporting and write the story that gets those people angry. If they don't let you in the group to begin with,
Right.
I think that it's actually easier to just say, well, I don't care about you because you don't care about me. Or, I mean, I care about something other than being your friend.
You care about the
I
story.
care about this mission that we
Right.
believe in of getting some important information out there.
I mean, this is a very tough
Just
time.
one woman's perspective.
Well, I think it's legit. This is obviously a tough time for investigative journalism in the country because of shrinking resources. I mean, what is it like now to be on the front lines? And how do you make the argument, to newsrooms that are cutting jobs and copy desks are disappearing, that this is a vital function of the news gathering operation?
I have strong opinions about that
Yeah,
because I quit the Globe to join a nonprofit investigator, and we're on the front lines of reporting, but my organization is on the front lines of like trying to survive financially, right? So, and it's really, really hard. It's really hard to convince foundations and individuals to contribute to something that benefits the public good, but it doesn't benefit the public good in necessarily the area of your interest, right? Like sometimes we'll write about genetics, sometimes we'll write about the environment. My colleague Jen McKim, who's wonderful, writes a lot about vulnerable populations and children in DSS care. Brooke Williams just had a wonderful piece in the New York Times about the Brookings Institute and think tanks. So when you're asking for money, it's not a specific group. So it is, I'm just talking about the finances of it, it's very challenging. So you have to come up with other revenue models. But it's not hard doing it. I think it's just hard.
And is that our fault? Have we done a bad job trying to explain why what journalism does matters? Why you have to have people like yourselves out there doing what you're doing? The benefit might not accrue to the public immediately, but it does eventually. Jen, I don't know, what do you think?
I mean, on a positive note, I will say at the Investigative Reporting and Editing Conference this year, there were record numbers of people, and that was really rewarding to see. And I do think that as there's this whole shakeout in the industry and a real reexamination of what are the priorities, I do think there is some recognition of that investigative journalism is the kind of journalism to invest in because it's what brings readers to your site and gets people involved, and it's the breaking news of the day that you're competing with X number of outlets, like newspapers themselves or it's hard to survive on just that kind of thing. And so I do think that there is a real effort, even in smaller newsrooms. I was talking to a managing editor, I think it was at the Tampa Bay Tribune, and they were sort of forcing every reporter to sort of have an investigative project on the side, like even the restaurant critic and other people, so that it was just a core part of who they are. I think it's hard for newsrooms to just allocate people full time to that kind of journalism because it's very expensive, because you do need to still at the end of the day fill the beast. But I think that I'm hopeful that there is some shifting of priorities toward investing more in this area.
I think what Jen said is really important and absolutely right. As hard and tough as the business is right now, the one thing that they can do is measure what people are reading in real time. I mean, you look at Chartbeat, the analytics, the metrics will show you right now what the top 20 things are that people are reading on the Boston Globe website. It's always the Spotlight team. I mean, when a big long piece comes out, and when good journalism is out there, people do click on it. I mean, so as long as it comes through with the clicks, I think there'll be. I know that they have to find a way to pay for the people to do it, and that seems to be the problem. But It's not like, it's not like, it's not like it's a product that people don't respond to. People now, you know, it's like the shampoo that people buy. As long as people keep on buying that shampoo, you keep on making it. I mean, that's the way I really think people think of the news business right now. What people are clicking on is what they're going to give to people.
Yeah.
I would just say, add to that, like, I find it so interesting because I do agree people read it. I wonder sometimes if the public, like, they'll click on a story if they're interested in it, if it's an investigative piece about it. But I do sort of worry about I'm both encouraged by the number of people getting investigative reporting, but I also see some really bad investigative reporting out there sometimes as a result of this. There's a big influx right now of people, and I worry about that eroding of what is good investigative journalism. Because
Well, tell us what that is, because I think, you know, journalists throw around these terms all the time. In this election
Yeah,
year,
that's true.
we hear, should reporters be fact-checking? As if that's a question. I mean, if that's what we do, we check to make sure things are factual. But, so we use this terminology in a way that I think maybe a lot of the public doesn't understand. What distinguishes investigative journalism from reporting? Anybody?
Well, in our newsroom, it's the pace in some ways, which is a bad thing because we take a long time to do projects. I think, you know, there's lots of reporters who are working on investigative projects at the Globe all the time. I think for us, an investigation is something where, you know, at a very basic level, you're by and large sharing and revealing something that other people don't know. You're holding institutions accountable, and you know, you're doing it in a very powerful storytelling way of storytelling. And but it's, you know, deeply reported. Often these days it's very data driven. That's a real sort of turning point for us these days. We're always looking at ways to capture new data and sort of present it in ways that even with our college housing, which everyone knew slumlords is a bad problem, but we sort of quantified it in a new way. So, but you know, there's investigative journalism going on every single day in newsrooms across the country, at the Globe, and obviously you're completely dedicated to it. So.
I would say, and I would just add that it's the opposite of what I do, which is right now, which is to very quickly, sometimes off the top of my head, write 600 to 700 words several times a week, more now than I used to, just quickly responding to things that are going on in the world without any time to do any kind of in-depth reporting. So responding to what investigative journalists do is at least a way to say this is important and people should pay attention to it. But I wonder, and I would ask you, women, is it harder to get people to get the powerful to respond to it? In other words, when you write about DCR, when you write about the housing, the student housing issue in Boston, did anything really come of that? Did they change things? It's easier, it seems to me, to ignore the media because we're so fractionalized now.
Yeah, I mean, you guys had tons of impact. I mean, so when I was speaking about the investigative reporting that may not be responded, I mean, there's just everyone and their brother is starting investigative news shops, and every TV station is starting, you know,
Right.
and thank goodness, that's great.
Right.
But it can get eroded away, and I think that does speak to the fact that it can be very difficult to keep pace up with this very important when you spend all this time on a story, or even a day on a story to look at something, is that you want an answer. You want someone to, you're doing this to change something. And it can be very difficult to get that response with the news cycle so quickly. What we do, I think some people don't like doing it, but what I do is once I write a story that I think is important and something should change, I actually call up legislators and say, what are you going to do about it? You know, and is that right? I'm, you know, and sometimes they do something about it, and sometimes they were going to do it anyway, and sometimes I told them about it. But I do think that's important. That's sort of part of our mission is not just to put something out there, it's to get it out there, because we're only writing about it because it's important.
And but it is, I think maybe what Joan's getting at is it because the media climate has changed so much. There used to be very powerful media institutions in this town, and when the Globe spoke,
Right. Well,
you could feel the reverberations on Beacon Hill, and that isn't quite as true anymore.
well, even with the Spotlight series on clergy sexual abuse.
Right.
I mean, the institutional response, I mean, it was, of course, the investigative journalism, it was the columns, it was the editorials. People paid attention to the Globe then in a way that they I don't want to say they don't pay attention to it now, but they don't.
But not as much. I mean,
Not
I think
as much. They
clearly
pay
it's
attention
still,
to it,
because
but
it's
not as
doing
much.
such serious journalism. But I think you can't, as you said, you can't take things for granted anymore. The cliche in the newsroom used to be after a big piece dropped, the day after, there'd be hearings on Beacon Hill, the Globe gets action, right? So that's the phrase everybody uses. I don't know if you hear that as much anymore.
Not quite as much.
I think it varies. I'd say one thing that is interesting, I think there is still, at least for our brand, because we're so lucky that, you know, there's wonderful things that have happened out of the incredible reporting from the clergy sex abuse, and the film has given this great halo effect. I think people do still get scared when they hear us calling, and it's not like they're not having. What has happened, which is interesting, and with some of the most recent reporting on sexual misconduct at private schools, is the schools will try to like one-up us or like preempt us, I guess is a better way to say it. They will like sort of try to get ahead of our news. Like they'll know one of the problems is our investigations take so long sometimes. We have to go to them and be fair and give them time to respond. So we've had some schools who've like released investigations alerting them like what our story is going to be. And at first we were kind of pissed because we're like, that's our news to break. But then in some ways it sort of like it alerted people, gave them a heads up so they would then look for our stories. So we sort of came around to being okay with that. But it's I think we definitely still have impact, and I think it is, you know, you do have to have the resources to stay on top of the issue. There's always this weird dynamic, especially I think with Spotlight, which is at what point do you let the story go to the Metro department or somewhere else to do the follow-ups? And so much of what's important about these series are the follow-ups, are making sure there's action. And we have fewer and fewer resources to do that, and it panned out even with our most recent series where it's like all these schools would be firing teachers or releasing their own reports, and it's like there's just not enough resources to stay on top of everything the way we used to, I think, where I mean, after the clergy sex abuse stuff, I mean, they were writing dailies every day, for hundreds of them for
a year and a half.
Yeah, a year and a half, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just, can I say one thing? It's just amazing how dominant the Globe still is. I mean, being in this
Yeah.
little nonprofit, we partner with like, we'll put materials in the Globe or BUR or other places. And getting a story in the Globe is just, everyone still pays attention to it. I realize it may not be in the same way, but it's interesting to see it from the outside now a little bit, how much of power it
I
still
was,
has.
right, I wasn't saying the Globe didn't have
No, no,
clout.
I-
I mean, I
really.
do think that the power brokers of Boston, the political structure and the business structure but to a lesser degree, because the business community is a lot different than it used to be. It's not as consolidated. Yes, they pay attention to the Globe. I just think that it can be easier to not be as responsive, because they realize that there is a drop in audience.
Right. Can you talk about some of the women that you admire that are doing work that you look at and think, with only more resources or more time, you know, those are pieces I'd like to write, I'd like to produce on television or on Facebook, and maybe talk even a little bit while you're thinking of that, about what the impact of social media has been, if any. Does it affect our attention span? Does it make people hungrier for the work that you do, or less capable of digesting it?
So that's a two-part question.
Yeah, sort of. Well, you all gave me that look like, oh, God, give me a minute.
Women
to
that
think.
we admire.
I know,
Well, we
organized
admire
like
each
that,
other. Social media gives the people that we write about and the people that we are highlighting their own outlet to get their own story out, right? So, right, I mean, Twitter, Facebook, however they want to do it, they can get their own story out. They put out their own statements. So I think it makes it easier for the people that we are writing about to get what they think is their side of the story out.
I think that's true.
What do you think?
So for places and journalists that I admire, female journalists, I always like to give a shout out to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
I didn't say the same thing.
They do some incredible investigative journalism, and there's two women in particular who I'm really fond of, Ellen Gabler and Raquel Rutledge, and they sort of show you what you can do at a newspaper that's not a giant mammoth like the New York Times or the Washington Post, and they do really great stuff, and Raquel Rutledge has done some fantastic things. Beth and I worked years ago together on this great great series, Fishy Business, where we spent a lot of time in a basement sort of taking samples of fish DNA and testing them to see if there was seafood mislabeling. And they've sort of done some similar things, not fish, but Raquel just had this great series on, I think it was, what was it? It was the inhaling the coffee roasting, chemicals from coffee roasters, and sort of, and incredible reporting there, and real impact and change immediately. And they're not a huge newspaper, and they're family owned, and they continue to produce excellent work out there.
Yeah, I mean, and shout out to Ellen, she's done this amazing, looking at newborn screening and genetic tests that go on. It was amazing, and it changed laws immediately too. And they're very, I mean, I think, I admire so many journals, it's going to be long, women journals, it's too long, but they all exhibit this idea to go where other people are not, and that's really a hallmark of great, I think, investigative journalists, is to do something a little different. And they go in places where people are not shining a light, and they shine a light, and it's amazing of the kind of mud you find, So, yeah, I think, and social media is, I forgot the question.
Well, just whether do you feel like it's had an impact on the kind of work you do, whether it's on the public's attention span?
Yeah, it totally has, and it gets very kind of, people do like it. So even when you're writing a story that's really hard on someone, if you gave them a shout out, they'll kind of like talk about that only. I find actually social media the most incredibly useful just for sourcing, and it's amazing. I'll put something on, in Reddit, you can message people, and Twitter, you can just sort of mine it for amazing things.
You mean searching for sources?
Oh, yeah, it's how I find so many people.
So give us an example of something that you might ask on Reddit.
I did a story recently on the Registry of Motor Vehicles in Massachusetts. If anyone wants to get their driver's license, you will know that it's virtually impossible to get a driving test. And the reason is because the Registry of Motor Vehicles has sort of given all the time slots during the day to private driving schools, where people can pay a premium to go, which is sort of a privatizing of a public service, and it's sort of wrong. Anyway, so I need to find people, and I just went on Twitter, search for RMV Massachusetts, and like words like pissed off or words like that, and I literally found like 40 people. And it was great. And
that's incredible.
And then Reddit, you can just for genetic stuff. I often write people on message boards. There's a message board for everything. And yeah,
I should try that.
That's great.
Yeah. Do you do it, Jen, too?
Oh, yeah, I find social media is great for trying to track down sources and find new leads, and you see people who will comment on your story, or you'll see one of your sources will post it and their friends will post, and they'll post their own, like with the sexual abuse stuff. Their friends will post their own stories of sexual abuse and misconduct, so it sort of leads you down like other potential stories. So it's great. Has it limited people's attention span? Yes. Is it problematic when one of the stories that I wrote sort of got picked up by lots of places, and then on social media it was sort of boiled down to like 2 sentences, and they took out all the nuance, and then like my sources get angry at me for like it being misrepresented in other media? That's problematic, but that's the world we live in.
It is indeed. It is indeed. So we thought we would open it up to you as well, to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So I'm not sure how we do this. Do we have a microphone? Let's see, I can't. Okay, great, because I can't see. There's lights in my eye. So if you have questions, don't be shy. We don't bite. Well, I do, but they don't. And you've got a barrier between you and me, so you're safe. Please come ask them anything you like.
Well, we heard that most your reporters, investigative reporters, are males, as if that's a bad thing, but at least from your perspective, they're all liberals, and most investigative reports seem to be from the liberal perspective. It would be nice to see more conservative attacks on things that need to be attacked. Some things, of course, are kind of neutral, but I think on balance, mostly you're going after people and institutions that media thinks are on the right. Now, since we're doing shout-outs here, I want to give a shout-out to Dorothy Rabinowitz, Pulitzer Prize-winning Wall Street Journal reporter who helped to blow the lid off of the outrageous, preposterous persecution of the Amarols. And guess who was one of the persecutors? Eileen McNamara.
I'd like to see
now,
evidence
Joan
of that.
Benaki, were you were in the business back then. Did you?
I'm not sure that we need a diatribe against Joan and I about a story that happened 25 years ago.
You don't want to talk about it?
Well, I'm happy to talk about it if you want to talk about it.
Joan Benaki, were you caught up in the hysteria like Eileen McNamara was back then? and persecuting the Emeralds?
I didn't cover the
And
Emerald
what are
case,
the-
I didn't cover the
Well,
trial.
you wrote enough about them, column after column, several columns on
That's
this
not
topic.
true, but.
Joan Benaki,
okay.
did you dissent from Eileen's outrageous take on the Emeralds back then?
I would just tell you, thank you for reading the Boston Globe. And,
Nice answer.
and remembering the words. Eileen's a great columnist, and she wrote with a lot of passion about things that she believes in.
Anybody else?
How about an
Yes,
opinion from
yes,
you?
ma'am. As I said, I think I wrote 2 columns about the Emerald case, and I've been hearing about it ever since, so I don't know.
Rather not talk about
It's an opinion
worst
column,
moment of
sir.
your career?
It's, no, not at all, not at all. Anyone else?
If you watch the movie Spotlight, it's clear that, I mean, this is a depiction of the newsroom, but that it's not only a very male newsroom, but it's a very white newsroom. Beth, you spoke about younger people in your program, that it's there's much more gender diversity. Can you speak about diversity in general of younger reporters that you see coming up? Do you see a more positive future in terms of a newsroom that just has a greater variety of reporters?
I hope it does, I mean, the people that I see, I'll be honest with you, like, I often find journalism, a lot of the younger people or people who are doing it today, sometimes it doesn't pay very well, right? Journalism doesn't pay very well. And I think there's gender diversity, but there's lack of socioeconomic diversity. I think that's very pronounced. In fact, I have lots of friends, like I'm 50 years old, I have lots of friends who've gone the freelancer route because they can afford to, not because they're scraping by like we all used to when we were young. And I actually find that, I mean, this is a little deviation, but I find that a really, really problematic because, I covered the environment for many years, and I get so many calls from so many young journalists who say, or mid-career journalists who say, I want to cover the environment. And I say, okay, great, but they're so ideological about it, and they're often in a socioeconomic class that they can write about it from a certain perspective, and I worry a lot about that. Maybe I'm not articulate, but,
I don't have any statistics, but my gut tells me that at least that some newsrooms are less diverse.
I think the statistics support you. They are less diverse.
That they are less diverse.
I mean, the American Society of Newspaper Editors had set themselves a deadline of 2010, I think, that they were going to have the number of minorities in their newsroom would reflect the population. And when that didn't happen, they just pushed the deadline back to 2025. And you have to make a commitment. The people are there. If they're not there, why don't we train people?
They're also less age diverse because of buyouts and retirements and budget cuts. So I think there are fewer older people there, less institutional memory, more younger people. Nothing against younger people. I was one of them once. But the age diversity that used to exist in newsrooms was, I think, a great thing because you learned from the people around you.
Right? People mentored you.
Right.
I mean, we can think of long lists of people that mentored all of us. Yeah.
I think
Men and women.
I think hiring people of color has long been a problem at the Boston Globe, frankly, and
Yeah.
other places. I mean, I know I work in the GBH newsroom now. That's where we're sort of we're independent, but we work there, and I know they've worked very hard to encourage a suite of hires, and it's hard, and it's hard. And a lot of my friends of color who've been here sometimes don't find Boston that welcoming, and
Right.
so it's something we all have to work for.
Exactly.
Work hard at it.
Right, it's true. And Boston is a much different city than it was in the 1970s and in the 80s when we remembered the trouble here and all covered it. But I think there's a holdover. And if you're a young African-American, you have an opportunity to go to Atlanta or to come to Boston, you might be more inclined to go to Atlanta. I don't know.
Yeah.
Folks, anybody? You're an awfully quiet and shy group. This is like shocking.
Well, they don't have to ask about the gender, could ask about the media, right?
Yeah.
I read a lot, and I actually have sent Joan some emails from time to time saying, I love your column, and what about this story or that story? And
I
I'm
hope
not
I
the
said thank
smartest-
you.
I'm not the smartest person in this room or anywhere, but I do read a lot, and I am, and I have a degree in journalism. I am surprised at how, when I'm talking to folks I know and in business, I'll mention a story and they'll look at me with a blank stare and say, oh, I didn't know about that. And meanwhile, the Globe and maybe Boston Magazine have carried it, and I'm surprised. It's sort of one of those things where you think, gee, I thought everyone knew about this. So there's that concerns me, and I'd love for your comments about how it just seems to me, maybe you agree or don't agree, folks just don't seem to read as much anymore. The other part was this recent so-called presidential debate, well, and this whole issue about fact-checking. So you were talking about fact-checking, and you bend over backwards and do somersaults in your fact-checking, and yet the gentleman from, was it NBC who moderated, it didn't seem to, and that seemed to me to be the whole point, is that if you're going to be asking questions, and whether it's Trump or Clinton, that you would somehow, and maybe one person can't know it all, but somehow have a set of facts, or at least know the reality according to, the facts. And so that really concerns me. And it seems like sometimes I read, and I think the press has divided the country into those in the know and those who aren't in the know. And so I commend you for all that you do and have done. And I was just wondering if you could address this issue of people reading, perhaps not as much, in this whole fact-checking thing wrapping itself around this presidential election. Sorry for the long comment.
No, that was a great comment. Can I take a crack at it just for a little piece of it? Is that I think part of the problem may be that we lump everything now as the media. So the media has failed us. The media isn't fact-checking. The media isn't doing investigative reporting. But in fact, the media is many, many things. There are blogs, and there's Politico, and there's the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe, and the New York Times, and there's lots of things in between. And there's lots of great investigative journalism has gone on during this campaign. But I wonder, if you don't agree with our questioner, that I wonder how many people have read it. There have been very good exposés of what's happening at the Clinton Foundation, about what's happening with Donald Trump's foundation, about Trump University. The Washington Post and the New York Times have put enormous resources this year into educating us about the people who are running. And I'm not sure that we've all read it, because not everybody reads those publications. That's a problem, isn't it?
It is a problem. I mean, the media is so fractured, and I think part of the problem is that people don't consume news the way they used to. If it's not on their Twitter feed or it's not on their Facebook feed, they're not going to see it. Or if it's not one of the 3 newsletters they may get in their inbox, they're not going to know about it. And so it is very difficult to break through all that clutter these days and to get the attention. The investigative stories aren't necessarily getting the attention they deserve, because there's just there's cat stories to read that show up on your Facebook feed, and you're going to go there for 30 seconds instead of some other great journalism. So.
It used to be like if something was in the Globe and you didn't read it, you never told anyone. You just sort of were quiet and made sure you read it the next time. And now what you say is, "Oh, I didn't catch it." You know what I mean? It's accepted now not to be a consumer of your local news in many ways. And I, yes, I think it's actually good we have lots of media streams, but I do think, just as my opinion, is that I think it's really good to have a geographical kind of look at as every person, to look where they're living and see what's wrong and what's right, and that seems like a civic responsibility. Mm-hmm. So I'm making a plug for the club.
Well, I guess that's what I was trying to say less articulately than you did when I said, isn't it harder to get response now? Because, yes, I think we write for a circle of people. To some degree, I think often we're writing for each other. And I think Twitter is to some degree that it's a lot of journalists promoting their stuff, and I'm like an avid Twitter reader, and I read a lot of stuff from a lot of different journalists. I don't know if the world at large, I know that the world at large is not reading everything, because you could just know, if you could walk into a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts and know that most 90% of the people there haven't read a lot of what we're reading. So it's become, there are fewer people reading, and I don't know how you change that.
Well, that's a good question about how you change it, because all the work that you all do is about getting people to pay attention to something in depth. Everybody covers, the gaffe of the day on a presidential campaign. So there's 10 stories we can all name off the top of our heads from just the last couple of weeks. But the big stories that require journalists to do what you do, which is to go into courthouses, dig out the depositions in the case of the lawsuit against Trump University, for instance. How do we make sure that everybody sees that so that we're all operating with the same information when we go to the polls?
I don't think you can anymore, but I don't want to sound pessimistic about it.
I don't think you can. I mean, just the way it is. I mean, no idea.
That's fair. Do we have somebody else? Yeah, hi.
Thanks for the panel. I wanted to ask a question based on something Jen said about the rise of data in investigative reporting. Do you see the new tools that are being introduced as a shift or an expansion in the ways that you can tell stories? And if it's a shift, what is being left behind? And if it's an expansion, how do you keep all those tools sharp?
I am not necessarily an expert in data journalism. I love databases, but not. we have dedicated data journalists like Todd Wallach is incredible. He works for the Boston Globe and he works on the Spotlight team. I would say it's an expansion of sort of, it doesn't substitute for anything else. I think it enhances our stories and our projects. And so something like that would be our, we sometimes create our own sort of data with the sex abuse stories. We sent out a survey to 400 or so private schools, asking them to take the survey and questions, and then once we got their responses, we sort of put it together into various different ways so readers could look at it, and then separate from that, we just mined lots of all of the existing reporting out there and created a drop-down chart so anyone could look at their own school or a school they're interested in and see what kind of sex abuse or sexual harassment issues that they've confronted, and we limited it to New England. But it's tools like that that just help, someone who's not going to sit necessarily and read our 1,200 word, 1,300 word story is going to maybe just look at the drop-down menu and be like, oh, what happened at Concord Academy? I went there. Like, do they know the secret that I know? And so if that's all they do, like in some ways that's, I'll take that reader.
Thank you.
Hi, Jen. I work with Jen. I'm an intern at NECIR. I have a journalism question, which is, what do you, Jen, you said that there's some bad investigative journalism with the influx of a lot of people wanting to do it, which is so good and bad things. So what are some hallmarks of bad investigative journalism that maybe some aspiring journalists or readers might identify or want to avoid?
Well, it's an easy look at something, right? Like, I'm trying to think of an example. There's lots of data out there today. Well, let me say one thing first, and I'll get to that. So there's lots more data out today. I think if you're a journalist, you're influx with data, and it's very easy to look at that data and draw some conclusions from it. However, you have to be very, very careful because it's often wrong, your first conclusion. So we do trainings around the country of like sort of young journalists, and I often show this EPA database called ECHO. It shows like every violation of EPA, and you can like look at it and go down to your town and see how many people have violated. And all these people sort of did stories on it in their local papers, looking at like that, there were 25 bad actors in this town who violated the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, and they're so awful. But they didn't do like basic journalism, which is like you have to call each of them up and understand their story, which takes about 9 times as long, So that I would consider is not great investigative journalism, because the best thing about investigative journalism is uncovering the reason why, right? Like I think that's really, really critical. It's not all gotcha and holding the powerful accountable, but it's about explaining why there's a problem and then coming up with a solution. And I think too often that's lacking. That's only one example. I just want to say one other thing about data, because I work with data. I know data, I don't know all the coding and everything, but what's amazing to me today, the government is throwing out so much data that it actually seems like they're doing a good job. And I would argue it's the opposite. They're confusing the issue because they're not giving the right data out that you want to answer questions. And I find this so much, particularly in the environment realm and around flood insurance, and many other aspects. But I just wanted to say that
Give me an
for
example
aspiring
of what you
journalists.
mean. What's like bad data they're flooding us with?
It's not bad
which
data.
we
They
don't
just give you
need.
so much data. When I write a PR person in Washington for whether it's the CDC or whether it's FEMA, right, the Flood Federal Emergency Management. And I've been working on a story for years now, trying to deconstruct one town, how much they're getting from money from flood insurance, let's say, and some other sources. And they just send you back 1 million links to 1 million pieces of data without any context or any information. And what's more, they don't give you actually the information that you asked for, which is like, how many times has this property been hit, or, blah, blah, blah. They'll say, oh, here's all the data, and then you spend 2 hours looking at the data, and they didn't show that at all. So I think they know that if you flood journalists who are very busy with lots of data, they will get confused and maybe go away. So your young journalists don't do that.
Could I just jump in on data? I kind of hate data. I mean, I'm not good at it, although I will say the Spotlight Team series that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1980 was one of the first uses of data, because it came up with the conclusion that the T was the most expensive, least efficient transportation system in America. And it's
See how much things have changed.
It still
since
is. It
1980?
remains so. 40 years later, you could write the same series. But I am, again, I'm not good with numbers. I'm not good with databases and things like that. But I am very suspicious of data. And I'll just throw one thing out. For example, this whole debate over charter schools. Good, bad, question 2. Yesterday, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation comes out with a report that purports to show via data that charter schools do not drain any money from public schools, or that it's a wash. I guess call me cynical, but I don't necessarily believe it. And I'm not smart enough or good enough with data to know why I feel that way. But I feel like data is now used to manipulate public opinion. So I'm suspicious of it. And maybe it's because I'm just not good enough at it to be able to get to the bottom of it, or have enough time to do that.
Well, that may be a good question for you as well, is that, I mean, journalists are notoriously bad at math. I mean, we all became writers because we can't add. So maybe that's a problem in newsrooms too, is that as you're saying, people don't know the difference. They see numbers and they think, oh my God, this restaurant has had 18 violations, but they don't realize that they're piddly violations or...
Yeah, it's a context.
I think I think it's really easy to manipulate and get quick hits and quick headlines, and that it takes people like you guys to devote the time and to not just take the first look at the numbers, but really, go into them and follow up and do the reporting that backs it up and make sure that the numbers say what they really say.
I think I'd push back on. I actually do not think journalists are bad at math. I mean, some are, but there's a lot of people who know.
Clearly talking for myself.
I get tired because when you meet people and they're kind of like, oh yeah, but no, there's and the most important thing I think to learn in journalism is statistics. I think it's I mean, if you want to talk about data lying, look at statistics. It's like every scientific study. I mean, that and conflict of interest, but it's amazing. And if you take a course in statistics, you're going to be that much farther ahead.
Right.
I wish I knew that when I was young.
Yeah, so that's a good point. That maybe
I
everybody
never
should.
took statistics.
There's a gentleman here, I think.
Hi, I was wondering if you can comment on the Rolling Stones article that was an example of bad journalism, and how that did a lot of harm for media and for women in general to feel comfortable talking about, reporting sexual assaults. And have we learned from that article, and have we repaired from, has media been able to repair itself from that issue?
I think the article you're talking about is the University of Virginia alleged rape case that was horrifically reported, underreported, that is. No substantiation. The basics weren't followed. So what do you think? Did that have a lasting impact on how people look at you and what you do?
I mean, it was a horrible moment for journalism at that time. I think there was an ombudsman report, I think, that was done to analyze how it happened, and I think if you read it, it just shows that the basics were not followed. And
It's a devastating report, and you can find it online at Columbia Journalism School. That really breaks down everything basic that was not done in that case.
And for that, I mean, for something like that to happen, it's sort of remarkable at the very upper levels of the magazine itself, to have those kinds of failures. When I think about what we go through in the process that we have, and sort of these lengthy conversations with lawyers and sort of the poring over fact checking, it's like, for us, the most important thing is to get it right. And it's not even just getting it right, it's also sort of letting your sources know. I used to be very protective and not want to share. Like, I wanted the gotcha, wow impact, and I've learned over time that's a very naive way to sort of approach journalism, that I want my sources, the people who I'm holding accountable, to know everything I'm going to say ahead of time, and to give every opportunity for them to push back and to tell me what's wrong, how it's wrong, because the worst thing you could do is like go into work the next day and see sort of the red light flashing with you know, demanding corrections, this is what you've got wrong. And so to me, those kinds of mistakes, and it's not a mistake, the fundamental travesty that happened there for that magazine and for journalism will continue to happen because we're not perfect, but I think it's really an aberration, and hopefully we will never at the Boston Globe do that.
But what you just described is a substantial change in even maybe 20 years, 10 years even, that people will call their sources back and say, I'm going to read these quotes back to you. This is what you said. Did I get this right? In the old days, you didn't do that. And everything you just said makes so much sense. I mean, you want to get it right. What's the big mystery?
Right, you lose all credit. If you don't get it right, you just lose your credibility for that story and for everything that comes after. So, and that's the most important thing we've got going for us. So.
Right.
Well, I teach a journalism class at Suffolk. I don't know if those couple of my students showed up. Are they still there? Hi. And I do use that as an example of some really, really bad journalism. But if you do go back and read the Columbia Journalism Review piece, you realize that the reporter just did not follow any of the rules of reporting, and neither did the editors editing the piece. She basically interviewed one person who told a story, and she didn't test it out against anybody else, just as you were saying, Jen. And I do think that it unfortunately did have a really negative impact, because it let the public, it let the narrative out that this isn't really a serious story. I mean, this isn't a serious problem. Women make up stories about sexual assault, and it kind of gave people an out, at least for a time being. However, the stories haven't gone away. They've been better reported. They've been reported correctly. Even with a column, I find that the easiest thing in the world is to write a column where you sit and you just write what you think you know, based maybe on a conversation or just a gut feeling. To actually call the person that you're writing about and tell them, well, this is what I'm writing about, you know, what's your response? You don't have to do that as a columnist, but when I do it, I'm always glad, because the holes that they poke in it makes it a better column, so that you don't go in the next day and have that red light flashing and the emails coming and catching you in a big mistake. It really is better to let people know what you have and what you think you have and what you're going with, so they can push back and get you on the right track.
Right, that's great. I mean, everything you've said about credibility goes right to the heart of the early questioners. Why don't people trust the media? Why don't they believe us? Those stories, when they happen, they stick in people's minds, and they never forget them. So you have to win people's trust every day. Anyone else? One final question? No, we do? Yes, hi.
I would say calling back your sources, timing is key.
What's that?
Timing is key.
What do you mean?
Because when you check with them, it has to be enough into the investigation that if they say something that derails the investigation, you can fix it, right?
Right.
But you don't want to do it so early on they can change the course of.
Right, or
Right.
call other people and give away your stuff, right?
That's true.
I've had that happen a lot.
True enough.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, have you ever had a story that you had a lead on and you weren't satisfied with the outcome of the answers that you got from the questions or the investigatory things that you were doing with it?
So often. Like, I mean, like chase down something that you can't quite prove at the end.
Yeah, and like, do you ever get like emotional because you know the answer, but you have to like really prove?
Yeah, I think, it's funny, I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but in investigative journalism, I always think you always hold back a little something, you know what I mean? First of all, something that you know, that you can sort of prove, but maybe it doesn't reach the level of everything else. So that's one thing. That just sort of like, I just like to do that because I feel like it's on a strong foundation. But the other thing is I often know so much more. Like, I'm working on a story now. I know there's this major grand jury investigation, blah, 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 blah. But like, there's no way I'm going to get that for my story. Like, I know that. It's very frustrating because I know what it involves and it's, what's going to happen eventually. But you just have to, when you do investigative, I think you have to like kind of like make a discrete box and that's your story and not be so bothered about the stuff that is swirling around it because you're out to prove one thing. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
Oh yeah, there's tons of stuff that always gets left on like the cutting room floor, or you can't just get it in because you don't have that like second or third person confirming it, but you know it to be true, and that's it's just a matter of sort of you've got to go with what you've got solid, and so but yeah, I mean there's so many stories in my sad bucket of like never made it into the paper.
And sort of the definition of journalism is the gettable. What's gettable, and it's daily reporting is that way, investigative reporting is that way. I'm working on a biography now. There are 10 things I know I could say about this woman, but I can't really prove them, so I'm not going to say them. But there's 30 things that I can say about her that I know definitively, and I know at the end of the day it's going to frustrate me that I have to give up because time is finite. As it is here. I'm getting a sign from our audience. We do have one more gentleman. So it's not that finite, sir. Here you are.
Well, first of all, thank you all very much, and I read the Globe, and thank God you folks are there many times. A question for you, a little bit about our public radio stations and our television stations. Are there any... if there are some investigative reporters, either at BUR or GBH or at Channel 5 or Channel 4, whatever, that you admire, would you mind talking about that? Or if you really don't, could you tell us some reasons why you think that doesn't exist?
Beth works a lot.
Yeah,
with it.
Beth.
So
that's
we're
your
based
world.
we're based at GBH. GBH in part is still a fairly young newsroom, and so they actually work with us to help them with investigative, not help do it, but partner with them, and it's been very successful. And BUR, yeah, there's some great. I mean,
David Bowery is at BUR,
yeah,
isn't he?
and Bruce Gellerman and Martha Wievinger. Like I'm working with both of them right now. And
Maggie Mulvihill, does she work with you? Or Maggie?
Yeah, Maggie was part of our center. She
Yeah.
now she's a professor at BU now. She's great. I mean, there's a lot of good work. So NECN, Allie Donnelly is fantastic. And actually NECN, which is becoming NBC, is really investing heavily in investigative reporting. They've hired, I think, 3 to 4 investigators. They're hiring a researcher now. So there's great. I think Channel 7 is Mike Bodette, who works at Northeastern. But yeah, I mean, so there's some good people out there. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, because we work with TV too. It's a hard sell because, not a hard sell. They want investigative news, but the cycle is like, they want a news story every day. And same thing around the country when we train journalists.
Can it only be 2 minutes?
TV, and it can only be 2 minutes. It has to be visual, has to be like, you need like the tires in the river, you know what I mean? And it's very challenging to do that kind of reporting, and even the reporters become frustrated, but that's what they try to do, and they're doing the best they can.
Right, I think that's right. Well, thank you all for coming. I mean, it's been a great night. I wish we could go on, but getting the high sign. Oh, wait. I do. Is there? But I can't see them, alas, because I don't think you can see folks either. They were right here.
We definitely
Hi.
had the
I just want to
stamina.
give one shout out to Philip Martin too. At GBH.
Pardon that?
Philip Martin at GBH. is
Oh,
fantastic.
absolutely.
I should-
Yes.
You have
Hi.
time for
I'm
one
sorry
more?
for not seeing you.
No, that's
I
fine.
know.
I don't know if everyone else feels this way, but over the years, I have been searching for that holy grail of the best outlet that has the most objective reporting, and I've been searching to no avail. I either find them too far to the left or too far to the right, And I guess my question is, do you think that this is because so many so many outlets now are owned by private institutions, corporate institutions, and because I'm very frustrated. I mean, I read CNN, I read AP, I read BBC, I read USA Today, I read them all, but I can never get. Every time I read something, it seems like it's just either one way or the other. Like you talked about the charter schools. It's almost like creative statistics. Like they can take data and just, make it support one view versus or the other. So that's my question.
That's a tough one. I guess I quickly would say I don't think there really is such thing as objective journalism.
Yeah.
That just by choosing topics and putting them in a place, whether it's the top of the website or the bottom or page 1 or page 50, you're making a judgment about what's important and what's not. And what you have to do is just have as many sources as you can. And my personal philosophy is that the truth is always somewhere in the middle.
Anybody else? Yeah. I mean, I think there's something else has happened. We have a partisan media. I'm not sure when we say that, that some outlets are to the left and some are to the right. Are we talking about their editorial pages? Are we talking about their news coverage? I'm not sure what we mean. It's again the issue with media. But also we're so polarized in our politics that I think even attempts by journalists to be impartial can run afoul of people who have very strong feelings one way or the other. So even if you are trying to walk that line, you can run afoul of 50% of your readership. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Iwonze. I want to know about two things. One in politics, and one that people that have been punished unknowingly, and then after the punishment, they found them innocent. How do you perceive that one? In politics, I observed some time ago, and recently, one of the political leaders is like the depressed. The journalists are fighting him, making him not to look good. And this time around again, I have found another political leader trying to say the usually depressed are on him. They are like fighting him, giving him more tight, unlike the other person, giving the other person more opportunity. That's on politics. On the other side of people that we are punished unnecessarily, innocently, they were sent to jail or killed. And when they found that, due to now we have DNA working, now they found that, these guys are innocent.
Right.
If people have made them, or people to know that, this person is innocent. How do you follow it up? So that when the person was released or said, you are free, how do you follow up? So that person must be rewarded of his punishment. That's two questions.
Okay. I mean, I think the last one, I think I could sort of get my hands around more in terms of what journalists do. You're talking about people, lots of people have been sent to prison, and we know here in Massachusetts we've had a number of those cases who were later exonerated by DNA or because the witnesses recanted. With the Sean Ellis case that's happening again right now, I think the DA still says he's going to retry him for the 4th time. But we have had lots of those cases here. And lots of those cases, the spotlight has been put on them by journalists. Are those difficult cases? How do you decide what's worth pursuing and what's not worth pursuing? Because clearly at the outset, you don't know the answers.
You go ahead.
No, we've done a couple at NACIR. My colleague Jen, not I, and it's very hard to decide. I'm speaking for her a little bit, to decide which ones to pursue, because in journalism, it's not like someone just calls up and says, investigate the Spectra Energy Project, you know what I mean? Which is, because you actually need some evidence to really pursue it as a journalist. It's not just, we just start fishing, you know? You usually need someone to drop a dime or something. And so in these cases, we get lots of, I mean, because we've done a couple of them now, we get lots and lots of people calling us all the time from prison, elsewhere, looking at, you know, trying to get us to take their cases on. And it's very hard to decide because there needs to be like a compelling argument, you know, because there's so many cases where people feel wrongly convicted. So I don't have a great answer for you. Other than that, it's very, very hard. And it's chosen based on, honestly, the ones that seem the most egregious, you know, that someone, you know, prosecutorial misconduct, you know, something bad.
I mean, it is kind of, in some cases, the luck of the draw that a certain case will gain somebody's attention. But you're right. I mean, there has to be something that prompts some evidence or something that makes you think that an injustice has been done. And the cases that we read about are the ones that journalists pursue.
Right. And usually it also involves having very activist lawyers who come to us and tell us, you need to look at this. This is a case that's important.
Yeah, an advocate, if you have an advocate that's, you know, I hate to say it, is an advocate is someone, you know, the Innocence Project's looking at, or someone right. is sort of vouching because they've already done a cursory look.
Right.
Yeah.
There's someone else here, I think, another gentleman. Last question. Okay, this is our last question, I'm told.
How do you target young generation into paying attention to what you do and giving certain information? So I know you say you use social media as a social media tweeter, but like prime example, you said, you know, if you go on Facebook, you might watch a 30-second feed on something, you know, it might not mean nothing, but like how do you attack basically just a younger generation? I feel like because I did an internship at Boston Globe, a lot of young kids don't read, especially about like rape or universities, like you talked about the housing. You know, I feel like y'all give a lot of great information if you decide to read it, you know.
Well, Joan, you teach. I mean, don't you find your students are engaged? I mean, they care.
Right. I have a great class this semester.
They care.
Right. I think it's nurture, not nature.
Yeah.
That if you grow up in a household where people follow the news and talk about politics and talk about issues and read, that it's easier for young people to connect with that. So, I mean, I do think that it's part about, you know, a family coming together in a certain way. And I do think, I think it's harder to get young people interested in things like politics today because they feel turned off by a lot of it, but not impossible.
Yeah, not impossible.
I just want to say,
Bernie Sanders did it.
I think journalists and papers have to do a much better job of not being so proprietary about their content and sharing it once it's out, you know, if they have their, because, you know, if you send, we send our stuff to after it's out in the Globe or BUR or something, we'll send it to like the Skim, which is like sort of a popular kind of aggregator. We'll, you know, of course, HuffPost will publish mostly anything you give them, and you know, I didn't realize that may not be a young person's place, but if you go to those places where and give the content away, I think that increases it. It's not just a method. It's not talking about the rationale behind it.
Right. You're not gonna. I mean, I think the days, you know, when, you know, you watched your father read the Boston Evening Globe at the dinner table, which is why I became a reporter, because maybe you'd pay attention to me if I was in it. Those days are gone because there is no Boston Evening Globe, and my father was a postal clerk. You know, he was. You were saying, you know, I don't know as much as other people do. I think my father knew more about what was going on in this city anyway than anybody I knew, because he read 3 or 4 papers a day.
Right.
But if that culture's gone, what do we replace it with? I think that's a challenge.
I think we need to follow where the young people are. I mean, I have children 23 and 27, and they'll tell me where they're getting the information from, and it's never where I'm getting the information from. But they know what's going on, so they must be doing something right.
I'm looking out. I see we're empty. Thank you all for coming. It's been great conversation. It's a great conversation.